Sure. My name is Jason Carpenter. So I work for a human capital management provider right now as a sales executive, and I oversee about 5 individuals, and we cover pretty much the western portion of the United States at this point. So work with enterprise organizations between 1 and 5,000 employees. Yeah, I love to do golfing. Really do anything outside as well with my family. So I have 2 children, ages 5 and 2, and so anytime we can find something to do outside, whether that's hiking or exploring or taking some vacation trips outdoors somewhere, definitely enjoy doing that. And then I'm also an avid sneakerhead as well too, so enjoy collecting some sneakers. I've been married for about 10 years now, and my wife, she's actually Korean. Like I said, we met here at the grand opening, and she still has family that lives over in South Korea, down in Changheon. They live down in Changheon. So she's actually gonna go visit there next month with my daughter. And then I have 2 children. I have a son who's 5 and a daughter who's 2 as well. And we reside in Arlington Heights, Illinois. We've been there for about 6 years. And prior to that, my wife and I actually lived in Tinley Park. People always ask me like, oh, at what age did you know you're adopted, or how did you know you were adopted, right? And having Caucasian parents, it's pretty easy to figure that out from a young age, and it's something my parents always made me feel comfortable about. So it was never something that I always had to question, why do I look different, right? It was something they were very transparent about, my history, why they adopted me and my sister, and then where I came from as well. So the story that I knew back then, and it definitely changed a little bit because I was able to find some history out about my family, but the original story was, and it's pretty close, but that my parents were older in life, and the way that I was born, I was breached with my arm first, and so when I was brought out through my arm first, it caused some nerve damage, and because of that, the best course of action so that I would get the proper medical care was, because my family didn't have a lot of money, was to put me up for adoption. So by putting me up for adoption, I was able to get the proper medical care, and then I didn't have any long-lasting effects from that perspective either growing up. Tons of joy, happy, love as well. They didn't have to go over on the plane to pick me up, so they were at O'Hare Airport waiting for me to arrive, and then when they picked me up, they just, overwhelming joy having me in their life from that point on out. Yeah, they tried to have children on their own for a while, and it just was something that they were unable to do. So they were looking at different options, and they could have gone different routes, but they really thought this would be a great way for them to also raise a child as well, was going through the adoption process. Yeah, and so they're adopted as well. I have a sister who's a couple years younger than me as well, and she was adopted from a different family in Korea. I grew up in New Lenox, so that's predominantly Caucasian. And it's funny enough, there was another family that had adopted from Korea as well. So besides my sister and I, there was this other girl who was my age, and then her brother. And I think we're the only 4 Koreans in the whole town. So, growing up, it was pretty prevalent that we were the minorities from that standpoint. Wasn't always easy, but I have a kind of a personality that's very easygoing. Something I learned to adapt to as the years went on as well, but certainly realized that I was in the minority growing up. Kids are absolutely brutal. So growing up and just really being the only different looking kid out of this whole population, it was tough, especially early on. But my grandma, I'll never forget, there was this little girl who was just really mean to me, and I was like in kindergarten or first grade. And my grandma at the time was a school bus driver, so she knew all the kids that went into this school, right? And I, tell her I was crying or whatever, like she keeps making fun of me, makes fun of my eyes and everything. And my grandma, for better or worse, she's like, well, that little girl goes pee still in her pants kind of thing. So she's like, just keep in mind though, like everyone, there's always something about everyone, right? People are gonna find something to make fun of you about. If it's not because you look different, it's because you're bigger, or you're too skinny, or you're too short, or you're too tall. So just being able to grasp that from a young age, it really helped me get past the fact of, yeah, I'm just gonna get made fun of that because I look different, but it doesn't mean there's anything necessarily wrong with me because I look different as well too. So something I really had to adapt to at an earlier age, I think, than some other kids have to, just because maybe they're a little bit overweight or a little bit taller. They don't get it all the time, and it's not something that, it might be in the back of their mind. I don't want to discredit that and say that that's not something they think about. But I walk into a room and everyone instantly knows that I look different than everyone else, and that's the first thing that goes through their head. Yeah, so I always knew I was adopted. I guess for me to, at the age where I was able to actually comprehend what that meant, being adopted, I guess I didn't really think through what that life would have been like if I was in Korea. I mean, growing up, sure, there weren't a whole lot of Asian American influences or role models, that I could really grasp onto. The only one that I saw was Bruce Lee, and I drew a very loose parallel. I'm like, oh, he's got Lee. I have Lee as my Korean last name. Maybe we could be related in some weird way, right? But obviously he was Chinese and I was Korean, and there was just no way that was possible. But growing up, that was really the only influence that I saw as something I could grasp onto growing up. But that's, from my reaction as being adopted, I just took it as, this is my life and this is my path that I got to go forward with. So they told me what it meant for them, I think, is the best way to describe that. So they always made it known that, because a lot of times people will be like, oh, wow, you're so lucky your parents adopted you. And they made it feel like my parents did us a favor by adopting us. And my parents very much made sure that that wasn't true. From the way they looked at it, they very much felt like they were the ones that got lucky for being able to adopt us and having us in their life, right? And so they never made it feel like, hey, you're lucky we adopted you or anything like that. So the way that I'm interpreting it and the way that they've made us feel about adoption is that it's very much something that brought a family together, and through that it brought like a different type of love, for lack of better words, from there too. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a Korean camp in the area. I'm drawing a blank what it's called right now. Pride, Camp Pride, yes. So we did that growing up for a few years. And then in addition to that, they bought some books. We were part of an adoption group, agency group as well too. So I always had others, some peers that are around my age that we had, and it was a small group of us. So that helped, understand what that meant. And everyone had a little bit different of experience, but for the most part, all the parents were similar, where they were Caucasian, and everyone got along for that most part as well too. There wasn't a whole lot of outlying or outliers that kind of differed from our experiences. So we all had a very similar experience growing up. So that definitely helped us figure out kind of what it meant to be adopted and what that experience should look like, just based off of what we saw from others as well. Just how different it was. And so even with the Ariran Lions Club as well. The Lions Club they had their picnic every year, and so we did that as well, and that's when we got to see a whole lot of different people and get even more introduction into the culture. So, years ago, it was massive, and we would fill up that entire picnic area. And so they would have the drumming, they would have the dancers. It was actually a really good experience, could see the food, experience all the different types of, like bulgogi, kimchi, just all the normal stuff, right? The things you think about from that perspective. So for me, I always enjoyed that because it was something different. It wasn't what I got on an everyday basis. But I always knew that was just part of me. It wasn't necessarily what defined me in a weird way. I just knew that was, my heritage of where I came from. It felt good. It was my first trip, and it was kind of nice just walking out of the airport, and I'm like, no one's looking at me, right? Like, I fit in with literally everyone else, the sea of people with black hair. So that was kind of cool. It was definitely a cool experience, just noticing it immediately, just how different I was perceived being abroad. I took it as just a cool experience. I went with very little to no expectations of going over there, just to say, it's going to be a cool experience. I'm going to be able to learn a little bit more about, the motherland and get to experience some very cool things on this trip as well. And so I went in with that type of mindset. So I think for me, while there were others on the trip that actually took it very, very differently and they reacted differently from there, for me, I enjoyed it a lot. Like I had a great time. I thought it was a cool experience. I love to travel as it is. For me, being able to go overseas for the first time and getting to see a brand new land that was my motherland, I loved it. So I had really positive things coming out of that. So even getting to the trip was kind of fun. So like I said, I was in college, this poor college kid, didn't have a whole lot of money. And it was only like $1,000 to go on this trip, right? But I'm like, I don't got $1,000, right? I'm just in college, just living off ramen, all that fun stuff. So the place I worked at, I worked with some friends as well. And I told my friend who was my manager at the time about this trip. I'm like, there's this trip coming up. It's kind of cool. I just want to see if I was able to raise this money, can I get the time off to go? He's like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, you're going to go on the trip, right? I'm like, well, I don't have money for it, but maybe next year. I'll start saving up because this trip was coming up fast, and then I can get the money to go next year. And he's like, okay. And so, and I still have a ton of gratitude for what he did as well. But without me knowing, him and one of my other really good friends as well, they actually raised almost all that money for me. So they raised like $950 out of that $1,000. They're like, I think you could afford $50, right? So it was really, really cool that they did that for me, and then it enabled me to go on this trip that was really life-changing. From there, I had a great experience in Korea, and I was like, this is very cool. We got to stay with the host family for a few days, so get to live with the Korean family and get to experience what that is. And I made some really good connections with that family too, and I had a spring break coming up the next year, and I'm like, that'd be really cool to try and save up to go there as well. And they're like, you can come back whenever you want, you can stay with us. So I took full advantage of that as well. And so when I came back from the trip, I decided, yeah, you know what, maybe I will take a look. And my mom actually asked me, she's like, how do you feel coming back from the trip? And we had a good discussion about that. And she's like, did you ever want to maybe do that search and see what your birth family history is like? And I was like, that actually would be kind of fun to do. I've never thought about doing the actual search now, but yeah, why not? It could be fun to do and just be great, just even from a health perspective, just understanding my history from there as well. And so I got really lucky. We reached out to the adoption agency, which was Bethany Christian Services at the time. And within about a month, they came back saying that they were able to locate my birth father. And so they had that information. I wrote them a letter. It was translated through the agency. And we had a couple letters exchanged back and forth, but my birth father was actually getting a little sick at the time. So my birth brother was the one who I was interacting with at that point. And I was like, you know what? Because of his health, this would be probably a really good time for me to go over if I want to meet him. Now's a good time to do. So I did take the trip in March, and then about 10 days before I went, I got a letter from my brother saying that my birth father actually passed away. But it was kind of comforting to know that he knew that I actually was searching for him and looking for him from that perspective. But it was fun. I still went over on the trip instead. I got to meet my birth brother, got to meet his wife, and then his daughter as well. And then really from that point, I was like, I'm going to get done with college here. It would be kind of a fun experience if I could actually go over there and live for a year, because I heard people going over and teaching English. So I reached out to some other people that I knew, and they helped me with some connections, and I was able to connect with somebody that was actually leaving their job that summer, and so I could backfill there. It was kind of perfect timing there. And I was able to get excused from my teachers, so I didn't even get to take my finals because I had to leave the country. They're like, oh, this sounds like an awesome experience. So that was really cool of them to let me do. Went over to Korea, lived in Seoul for about a year, reconnected with my brother there. While I was there too, it was kind of fun because my brother's wife, she actually had twins. So I got to see these cute little twins running around for about 8 months while I was there. That was a fun experience. But my brother was really, really helpful. He helped me get connected with a lot of my family over there. So I got connected with aunts and uncles, cousins, and it was great. I had a cousin that lives in Busan, and she's got a son, so my second cousin, who's 2 years younger than me. And he was going to the University of Michigan. So he was in Korea at the time. We got connected, and we still keep in touch quite regularly as well. He lives out in California now, but we were able to connect. He came over for some Thanksgivings throughout the years as well, so that was a great relationship. But probably the most important connection he helped me make was with my birth mother. And so my birth father and birth mother were no longer together. And he's like, growing up, he's like, I know who your birth mother is. Like, I see her face. I know the name. Like, if I heard the name, I would know it. But I just can't remember. And I'm like, well, because of what happened with the agency and the documentation, they had my mother's name, but the name didn't match the ID. So they weren't willing to provide me that information. And I tried for the whole year I was there. And about a month and a half before I was supposed to leave, he's like, you really want to meet your mother, right? And I'm like, I do. And he's like, well, what's stopping it? And I told him the agency is not willing to give me the name because of that. I don't know what he did, but he called, and within 10 minutes he calls me back. He's like, I got the name, which was awesome. So he had some friends down at a local police station, was able to help find my birth mother, found out where she was staying, and she was staying at like, I guess the equivalent of like a senior living complex. So I went down there that weekend right away, met him there, and we went to go visit my mother there, which was awesome. So I got to meet my birth mother. Unfortunately, she had Alzheimer's, so she didn't really know who I was at that time. But for me, it was just a great experience because I could actually see the woman that gave birth to me, and that was a really special experience for me as well. So I got to spend the whole day with her and took some pictures and all that fun stuff, and just get to talk to her the best that I could. And even though she wasn't very talkative, and just because she just was out of it at that point, it was still very meaningful for me. And I hope somewhere deep down inside, she knew who I was. At least there's always that hope, right? So. It was pretty unreal. It was very overwhelming. I had a bunch of emotions just kind of go over me because I never thought I would ever get that opportunity. Just being told from the adoption agency, like, the name doesn't match the ID, it just felt like a big dead end, and there's just no way I was gonna get past that. So, I'm eternally grateful to my brother for what he did to help me get connected with my mother. And then that experience itself was it was awesome. It was just a really, really good experience for me. It was nice to be able to see like some of the same features and some of those things that non-adoptees probably take advantage of, and they just don't think about all the time, right? Like, oh yeah, you look like your mother, you look like your father. It was kind of fun to be able to see my birth mother and say, wow, I do look like you in certain things. We have the same ears, we have the same nose. So it was fun to be able to draw those parallels while spending time with her as well.
Is she still alive?
No, she actually passed away. So she passed away a couple years after I left Korea. But for me, it was enough for me to actually see her the one time and at least get to spend a day with her before I left. So. Yeah, I do. So I was actually a big part of Catch back in the day there too. I was actually one of the presidents there for a few years. So I was very involved with the adoptee community, and I think, at least for me personally and some of my friends too, you stay connected with that community and you kind of form your bonds from there, and you get what you need from the big group. And then, time goes on, you just kind of branch out a little bit from there as well there too. So I do have a group of friends that I hang out with fairly regularly, and we go golfing and all that fun stuff that have come from the Catch connection as well. For me, and I think a lot of it has already been advocated for, which is great, and some laws have been changed, but the dual citizenship was a big thing in the past. I think access to the records is a big thing too. I know people still struggle with that, getting the access to it, and the poor record keeping, that's not something that we as adoptees should then pay the price for, and quite literally pay for. When I did the initial birth search for my birth mother, I want to say that I didn't pay anything, or if I did, it was very, very little amounts of money. And then years later, it was within the last few years, we were going through some old pictures, and I saw a picture of my foster family, and I'm like, it'd be kind of fun to see if they're still around and get connected with them, because they were a big part of my life there for 6 months. They raised me for 6 months, really, or 5 months, whatever it was between that time. And so I reached back out to the Bethany Christian Services to see if they could help me with that search. And it was like $200 or something to begin that search. And I couldn't really believe the fact that they were now charging me this amount of money just to access records about my past. For me, it just didn't seem fair. So, I think a big part, and not even just Korean adoptees, but adoptees in general, like just having the fair access to records, I think is something that is an area that could be advocated for quite a bit. If I had to describe it in a word, is like a connection. So for me, adoption is a connection. So, people can connect in a lot of different ways and come into each other's lives in a lot of different ways. And I guess for me, that's what adoption means for me. It's part of my identity. It's who I am. It's not something I can ever hide from either, like from a professional standpoint too. And, I go and meet somebody and, I'm in sales. So a lot of times people will, I'll shoot them an email. They'll see my name, Jason Carpenter. I show up in person and I'm like, oh, you're Jason Carpenter, right? And so it's who I've embraced it. Like it's who I am. It's part of my identity. So I think that's kind of what, at least for me, that's what adoption means.